This presentation is a bilingual tool for research innovation as a product of English immersion program in Valdosta University. I am going to present a comprehensive analysis about theories of social and sustainable development as an economic dialogue. This comprehensive analysis examines the evolution of economic development theories from classical growth models to contemporary sustainable paradigms. Drawing from extensive academic literature, this presentation traces the theoretical progression from early mechanistic models of economic growth to more nuanced evolutionary approach that incorporate environmental and social considerations. For the beginning, the concept of economic development has undergone profound transformation since the emergence of development economics as a distinct field in the mid-20th century. What began as relatively straightforward pursuit of economic growth through capital accumulation and industrialization has evolved into a multifaceted understanding that encompasses environmental sustainability, social equity, and human capabilities. This evolution reflects not only advances in economic theory, but also growing awareness of the limitations and unintended consequences of traditional growth-oriented development models. The journey from classical development theory to sustainability represents more than a mere academic progression. It embodies a fundamental shift in how societies conceptualize progress, prosperity, and the relationship between human activity and the natural environment. This transformation has been driven by mounting evidence of environmental degradation, persistent inequality, and the recognition that traditional measures of economic success, such as gross domestic product, fail to capture the full spectrum of human well-being and societal progress. Understanding this theoretical evolution is crucial for contemporary policymakers, development practitioners, and scholars who must navigate the complex terrain of sustainable development in an interconnected world facing unprecedented challenges, including climate change, resource depletion, and growing inequality. The synthesis of classical development theory with sustainability principles offers valuable insights for designing development strategies that can meet present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. For the beginning, Walt Whitman Rostow's the stage of economic growth represents one of the most influential and widely cited theories in development economics, with over 24,000 academic citations. Rostow conceptualized economic development as a linear progression through 5 distinct stages, each characterized by specific economic, social, and technological features. The first stage, traditional society, is characterized by limited production functions, pre-Newtonian science and technology, and hierarchical social structures centered around family and clan relationships. Agricultural production dominates the economy with limited surplus available for investment in other sectors. The second stage, preconditions for takeoff, involves the gradual emergence of modern science and technology, increased agricultural productivity, and the development of transportation infrastructure. This stage is marked by the emergence of entrepreneurial leadership and the accumulation of social overhead capital necessary for sustained growth. The third stage, the takeoff, represents the critical transition period where growth becomes self-sustaining. During this phase, investment rates rise dramatically. New industries emerge rapidly, and technological innovation accelerates. Rostow identifies this stage as lasting approximately 20 to 30 years and requiring investment rates of 10% or more of national income. The fourth stage, drive to maturity, spans roughly 40 years and is characterized by the diversification of the economy, the development of more sophisticated technologies, and the emergence of a skilled workforce capable of producing a wide range of goods and services. The final stage the culmination of the development process where societies achieve high levels of per capita income and consumption becomes focused on durable consumer goods and services. In this stage, the economy shifts towards services and societies begin to address issues of social welfare and quality of life beyond basic material needs. Rostow's theory provided a compelling framework for understanding economic development that resonated with policymakers in both developed and developing countries during the post-World War II era. The linear progression model offered hope that all countries could eventually achieve the prosperity enjoyed by Western industrialized nations by following a similar developmental path. However, the theory has faced significant criticism for its deterministic assumptions, cultural bias toward Western development patterns, and failure to account for the diverse historical, cultural, and geographical contexts that shape development processes. The second one, the Lewis dual sector model, introduced Arthur Lewis in his seminal work, Economic Development with Unlimited Supplies of Labor, provided a sophisticated analysis of the structural transformation that characterizes economic development in labor-abundant economies. The model conceptualizes developing economies as consisting of two distinct sectors: a traditional subsistence sector, primarily agricultural, characterized by low productivity and surplus labor, and a modern capitalist sector, typically industrial, characterized by higher productivity and the use of reproducible capital. The central mechanism of the Lewis model involves the transfer of surplus labor from the subsistence sector to the capitalist sector, where it can be employed more productively in the subsistence sector. The marginal productivity of labor is assumed to be zero or very low, meaning that workers can be withdrawn without reducing total output. This surplus labor can then be absorbed by the expanding capitalist sector at wage slightly above subsistence levels, providing the labor force necessary for industrial growth while keeping labor costs low enough to ensure profitable investment. The model predicts that as the capitalist sector expands and absorbs surplus labor, wages will remain constant at subsistence levels until the surplus labor is exhausted. At this point, known as the Lewis turning point, wages begin to rise as the economy faces labor scarcity rather than surplus. This transition marks a fundamental shift in the development process as rising wages begin to squeeze profits and alter the dynamics of capital accumulation. Lewis' model has been particularly influential in understanding the development experiences of East Asian economies, where rapid industrialization was accompanied by the absorption of large rural populations into manufacturing sectors. The models emphasized on structural transformation and the role of labor mobility in development has provided valuable insights for understanding how economies transition from agriculture to industrial basis. However, the model has also faced criticism for its assumptions about unlimited labor supplies, the homogeneity of labor, and the automatic reinvestment of profits in the capitalist sector. Critics have argued that the model oversimplifies the complex social and institutional factors that influence labor mobility and wage determination in developing economies. The Harrod-Dorman model, this is the last one classical theory. The Harrod-Dorman model, developed independently by Harrod in 1939 and Dormer in 1946, represents one of the earliest formal mathematical models of economic growth and has been extensively applied to development planning in developing countries. The model establishes a direct relationship between savings, investment, and economic growth, providing a framework for understanding the conditions necessary for sustained economic expansion. The fundamental equation of the Harrod-Domar model states that the growth rate of an economy is equal to the savings rate divided by the capital output ratio, also known as the incremental capital output ratio. This relationship implies that countries can achieve higher growth rates by increasing their saving rates, improving the efficiency of capital use, or both. The model's simplicity and mathematical elegance made it attractive to development planners seeking to identify the investment requirements for achieving target growth rates. The model assumes that labor and capital are used in fixed proportions, that there are no diminishing returns to capital, and that savings are automatically invested. Under these assumptions, the model predicts that economies can achieve any desired growth rate provided they can generate sufficient savings and investment. This led to the widespread adoption of capital accumulation strategies in development planning during 1950s and 1960s, with many countries focusing on increasing investment rates as the primary means of accelerating economic growth. The Harrod-Domar model played a crucial role in justifying foreign aid programs, as it provided a clear rationale for external financing to fill the saving gap in developing countries. If domestic savings were insufficient to finance the investment required for target growth rates, foreign aid could provide the necessary capital to bridge this gap and accelerate development. However, the model's assumptions have been criticized as unrealistic, particularly the assumption of fixed factor proportions and the absence of diminishing returns to capital. Empirical studies have shown that the relationship between investment and growth is more complex than the model suggests, with factors such as human capital, technological progress, and institutional quality playing important roles in determining growth outcomes. Now, we try to avoid some transitions toward sustainability from critiques and new paradigms. The classical theories of economic development, while groundbreaking in their time, began to face significant challenge by 1970s and 1980s as empirical evidence accumulated regarding their limitations and unintended consequences. The linear progression models of Rostow, the structural transformation focus of Lewis, and the capital-centric approach of Harrod-Domar all shared certain fundamental assumptions that prove problematic when confronted with real-world development experiences and emerging environmental concerns. One of the primary criticisms of classical development was its not to focus on economic growth as measured by aggregate indicators such as GDP, without adequate consideration of distributional effects, environmental impacts, or broader measures of human well-being. The assumption that economic growth will automatically translate into improved living standards for all segments of society proved overly optimistic, as many developing countries experienced rapid economic expansion alongside persistent poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation. The environmental critique of classical development theory gained particular prominence following the publication of the Limits to Growth by the Club of Rome in 1972, which used computer modeling to demonstrate the potential for resource depletion and environmental collapse if exponential economic and population growth continued unchecked. This study challenged the fundamental assumption of classical development theory that unlimited growth was both possible and desirable, introducing the concept of planetary boundaries and finite resource constraints into development discourse. Furthermore, the cultural and contextual limitations of classical development theory became increasingly apparent as scholars recognized that the Western-centric models fail to account for the diverse historical, cultural, and institutional contexts that shape development processes in different regions. The assumptions that all countries would follow similar developmental trajectories ignore the unique circumstances, values, and priorities of different societies. In this, in this, um, in this moment, the recognition of environmental constraints on economic development led to the emergence of environmental economics as distinct field of study in the 1960s and 1970s. Early environmental economists, such as Kenneth Boulding, introduced the concept of spaceship Earth, emphasizing the closed system nature of the global economy and the need to account for environmental inputs and outputs in economic analysis. This period saw the development of new analytical frameworks that attempted to integrate environmental considerations into economic theory. The concept of externalities previously relegated to the margins of economic analysis gained prominence as economists recognized that many environmental costs not reflected in market prices, leading to systematic undervaluation of natural resources and overproduction of pollution. The work of economists such as Arthur Pigou on welfare economics provided theoretical foundations for environmental policy intervention, including taxes on pollution and subsidies for environmental protection. However, these early approaches still operated within the framework of neoclassical economics treating environmental problems as market failures that could be corrected through appropriate policy interventions rather than fundamental challenges to the growth paradigm itself. The Bertrand Commission um, uh, about since the publication of Our Common Future by the World Commission of Environment and Development, that is Bertrand Commission, in 1987, marked a watershed moment in the evolution of development theory. The Commission's definition of sustainable development are defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, provided a new conceptual framework that attempted to reconcile economic development goals with environmental protection and social equity. The Bertrand report represented a significant departure from classical development theory in several key respects. First, it explicitly recognized the interconnectedness of economic, environmental, and social systems, arguing that sustainable development required integrated approaches that addressed all three dimensions simultaneously. Second, it introduced the concept of intergenerational equity, emphasizing the moral obligation of current generations to preserve opportunities for future generations. The report also challenged the assumption that environmental protection and economic development were necessarily in conflict, arguing instead that properly designed development strategies could achieve both economic growth and environmental sustainability. This perspective opened new avenues for research and policy development focused on identified win-win solutions that could advance multiple objectives simultaneously. The influence of the Bertrand report extended far beyond academic circles, providing the conceptual foundation for major international initiatives, including the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, the development of 21 Agenda, and subsequent global environmental agreements. The report emphasizes sustainable development has been credited with fundamentally reshaping international development discourse and policy frameworks. This is what I am discussing in the past about the Bertrand Commission and sustainable development. Now, contemporary theorists like Herman Daly, that emerged as one of the most influential critics of conventional economic growth theory and a founding figure in the field of ecological economics. Daly's work challenged fundamental assumptions of neoclassical economics, particularly the belief that economic growth could continue indefinitely without regard to environment, right, or with This concept of steady-state economics represented a radical departure from growth-oriented development models. He argued that in a finite world, the economy must eventually reach a steady state where material throughput remains constant while quality of life continues to improve technological progress and better allocation of resources. This perspective directly the imperative that underpinned classical development theory. One of Daly's most significant contributions was his distinction between growth and development. While growth refers to quantitative increases in the scale of economic activity, development refers to qualitative improvements in well-being and life satisfaction. Daly argued that beyond a certain point, continued economic growth could actually reduce well-being by generating negative externalities that outweigh the benefits of increased production and consumption. Daly's work on the Index of Sustainable Economic Welfare and later the Genuine Progress Indicator provide alternative measures of economic progress that attempted to account for environmental income distribution and factors that we ignored by conventional GDP measures. These indicators often show that while GDP continued to grow, genuine welfare had stagnated or even declined since the 1970s. The theoretical framework developed by Daly and other ecological economists emphasized the economy as a subsystem of the larger economical system subject to the laws of thermodynamics and ecological principles. This perspective highlighted the impossibility of infinite growth on a finite planet and the need for economic systems to operate within ecological carrying capacity. Now, Amartya Sen, Amartya capability and challenger to conventional development theory, shifting focus from economic growth and resource accumulation to human capabilities and freedoms. Sen argued that development should be understood as the expansion of human capabilities, the substantive freedoms that people have to lead the kind of lives they value and have reason to value. The capability approach distinguishes between functions, the various things a person may value being or doing, and capabilities, that is, the alternative combinations of functionings that are feasible for a person to achieve. This framework emphasizes that development should be evaluated not merely by the resources available to individuals, but by their actual ability to convert those resources into valuable outcomes. Sen's work highlighted the limitations of income-based measures of development, demonstrating that countries with similar per capita incomes could have vastly different of human depending on how resources were distributed and used. This insight led to the development of the Human Development Index by the United Nations Development Program, which incorporates measures of health, education, and income to provide a more comprehensive assessment of development progress. The capability approach has been particularly influential in highlighting gender inequalities and other forms of social exclusion that are often invisible in aggregate economics measures. Since work on development, as freedom emphasizes that true development requires not only economic growth, but also removal of various ways of freedom, including poverty, tyranny, poor economic opportunities, systematic social deprivation, and neglect of public facilities. The integration of the capability approach with sustainability concerns has led to new frameworks for understanding sustainable human development that emphasize both the expansion of human capabilities and the preservation of environmental systems that support human well-being over time. Now, in the emergence of another approach is the evolutionary economics. In the late 20th century, provide new theoretical foundations for understanding economic development as a complex, non-linear process characterized by path dependence, institutional evolution, and technological change. This approach, influenced by the work of Joseph Schumpeter, and later developed by scholars such as Richard Nelson and Cindy Wheeler, that is not here, but evolutionary economics emphasizes that innovation, learning, and adaptation drives economic change. Unlike classical development models that assumed smooth transition between development stages, evolutionary approach recognize that development processes are characterized by uncertainty, experimentation, and the co-evolution of technologies, institutions, and social systems. This approach influenced by the work of Joseph Schumpeter and later developed by scholars such as Richard Nelson and Cindy Winter, offered an alternative to the equilibrium-based models of neoclassical economics. The evolutionary perspective has been particularly valuable in understanding the role of technological changes in development processes. Using technology as an external factor, evolutionary economists examine how technology and technological change influence our understanding of development as a complex adaptive system characterized by feedback loops, nonlinear relationships, and emergent properties that cannot be predicted from the behavior of individual components. In synthesis, the balancing growth, economic sustainability, the institutional and governance dimensions, and technology and innovation are important. This is about evolutionary economics. I told you about innovation and development and the divergence is explained by building sustained technological capabilities, but the common themes and divergences is the evolution from classical development theory to contemporary sustainability paradigms reveals both continuities and fundamental departures in how scholars and practitioners understand economic development. While classic theories focus primarily on the mechanism and mechanics of economic growth and structural transformation, contemporary approaches have expanded the scope of development to encompass environmental sustainability, social equity, and human capabilities. One of the most significant continuities across the theoretical traditions is the recognition that development involves fundamental structural change in economic, social, and institutional systems. Rostov stage of growth, Lewis' dual sector model, and contemporary evolutionary approach all emphasize that development is not simply a matter of quantitative expansion, but requires qualitative transformations in how societies organize productions, consumption, and social relationships. Uh, has been reconceptualized in important ways. While classical theories generally assume that structural change will follow predictable patterns based on Western historical experience, contemporary approaches recognize the diversity of development pathways and the importance of context-specific solutions. The evolutionary economics perspective in particular emphasizes that development processes are characterized by path dependencies and that historical contingencies can lead to very different outcomes, even under similar initial conditions. Another important area of convergence and divergence also concerns the role of technology in development. Classical theories recognize technology as important, but generally treated it as an external factor that will be automatically adopted as countries progress through development stages. Contemporary approaches, particularly those influenced by evolutionary economics, place technological learning and innovation at the center of development processes, emphasizing the endogenous nature of technological change and the importance of building domestic technological capabilities. One of the central challenges in the contemporary development theory is integrating insights from classical growth theory with new understandings of environmental constraints and social equity concerns. This integration challenge has led to the emergence of new frameworks that attempt to reconcile potentially competing objectives of economic growth, environmental sustainability, and social equity. The concept of green growth represents one attempt to address this challenge by arguing that environmental protection and economic growth can be mutually reinforcing through technological innovation, resource efficiency, efficiency improvements, and the development of new green industries. Proponents of green growth argue that properly designed policies can create win-win situations where environmental improvements generate economic benefits and vice versa. However, critics of the green growth paradigm, particularly those influenced by ecological economics, argue that the fundamental conflict between infinite growth and finite planetary resources cannot be resolved through technological solutions alone. They advocate for more radical approaches that question the growth imperative itself and focus on achieving well-being within ecological limits. The capability approach offers another perspective on this integration challenge by shifting focus from economic growth to human development outcomes. From this perspective, the goal of development should be to expand human capabilities and freedoms, which may or may not require high levels of economic growth, depending on how resources are distributed and utilized or used. Regarding institutional and governance dimensions, contemporary development theory has also placed much greater emphasis on institutional and governance factors than classical approaches. While early development theories focus primarily on economic variables such as saving rates, investment levels, and sectoral compositions, contemporary approach recognizes that institutions play a crucial role in determining development outcomes. The new institutional economics has highlighted how property rights, rule of law, governance quality, and social capital affect economic performance and development prospects. This perspective suggests that successful development not only appropriate economic policies, but also effective institutions that can support market functioning, public goods, and manage social conflicts. Environmental governance has emerged as a particularly important dimension of institutional analysis, as scholars recognize that development requires new ways of governance that can manage complex environmental challenges spanning multiple scales and jurisdictions. This has led to increased interest in concepts such as adaptive governance, polycentric governance systems, and collaborative management approaches. This theoretical evolution from classical development to development models to sustainability paradigms has profound implications for development policy and practice. Classical development strategies typically emphasize capital accumulation, industrialization, and economic growth as primary objectives, with social and environmental concerns treated as secondary considerations that will be addressed once sufficient economic progress had been achieved. Contemporary approaches suggest a more integrated framework where economic, social, and environmental objectives, as you can see here, requires new policy tools and approaches that can address multiple objectives and manage trade-offs between competing goals. Examples include payments for ecosystem services, green fiscal reforms, social protection systems that enhance both equity and environmental sustainability, and participatory planning processes that engage multiple stakeholders. The measurement, excuse me, I jumped to the references. The measurement and evaluation of development progress has also been transformed by theoretical evolution. While classical approaches relied primarily on economic indicators, contemporary frameworks employ multidimensional measures that capture progress across economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Um, the evolution of development theory has also transformed understanding of the role of technology and innovation in development progress or processes. Classical theories assume that developing countries could achieve technological progress by adopting technologies developed in advancing countries, with limited attention to the processes of the technological learning and capability building. Contemporary approaches emphasize the importance of building domestic technology capabilities and innovation systems that can support sustained development. This requires policies that go beyond technology transfer to include investments in education and training, research and development, and institutional frameworks that support innovation and entrepreneurship. The sustainable imperative has added new dimensions to technology and innovation policy with increased emphasis on developing and deploying clean technologies, resource efficient production processes, and circular economy approaches. This has led to new policy frameworks such as green innovation systems, sustainable innovation policy, and mission-oriented innovation approaches focus on addressing societal challenges. In conclusion, the evolution of economic development theory eh, has been driven by empirical evidence regarding the limitations of growth-oriented approaches, growing awareness of environmental constraints, and recognition of the importance of social and development. The journey from classical development theory to sustainable paradigms demonstrates the dynamic nature of social science knowledge and its capacity to evolve in response to changing circumstances and new understandings. Unprecedented global challenges in the 21st century, this theoretical evolution provides valuable insights for design and development strategies that can promote human well-being while respecting planetary boundaries and ensuring intergenerational equity. Finally, this slide includes some topic-based references that I use in the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.